Hi everyone, thanks for joining us at Plum Good Quilting for another tutorial, How to Make a Fast Christmas Tree Quilt, Part 2. Now Part 1 is a live video of me with the fabrics and basically showing you at the cutting table how to do this process, but I wanted to make sure that you had a good understanding of how this works because there's no measurements involved, so it is a little bit harder for the traditional quilter to wrap their head around, okay, how much fabric am I going to need, how do I cut this, I don't understand how I'm sewing all this mess together. So I just wanted to give you more than one option in learning how to construct this quilt. Now, as you know, if you listen to the first video, this is the quilt that started all the mess. I made this quilt 5 or 6 years ago, and we had been using it, had it up on our quilt gallery just because it's cute. I mean, it's super simple, and it's probably the quickest quilt you'll ever put together. We had lots of interest, but people were wondering, where's the pattern? How did you do that? And so I thought, well, I'll go ahead and give you a quick tutorial on it. And I will have to say, my favorite part about this quilt is you could never recreate the same one twice. I've done it. I've used the same fabrics, and it'll come out just not even looking close to the one you did before. So it truly is a work of your own once you get through with it. Okay. The first thing I'm going to tell you is to make this quilt that I originally made, the approximate finished size was 50 by 60 or 65. This is going to vary slightly based on the size of the trees that you cut that you're beginning with. But I can give you a basic fabric requirement for that size of quilt. And the beauty of this is fat eighths work extremely well for this process. The first time I made it, I used lots of scraps because I wanted lots of variety, so I was just going through the stash looking for tons of different greens, tons of different neutrals to do this with. Now, I will tell you that after I've made quite a few, you must have at least 8 different greens, preferably more, and you must have at least 12 different neutrals, and preferably more. The more variety, the better it is. I've also seen this done with the same background fabric all over it, so it just depends on how you want to do it. You can totally make it yours. Now, outside of what I was telling you for fabric requirement for fat eighths and how many color choices you need, you definitely are going to need at least 2 yards of greens and 3 yards in neutrals for a quilt that size. So that'll give you some indication of how that works. So let's move on to, as you can see here, no, I do not have 8 greens because this is actually a picture from when I was making the little wall hanging. So I only chose 5 because I knew I was going to end up with 3 or 4 blocks to work with. Okay, as you can see here, I basically had some fat eighths, and it just works fantastic for this. Stack them all up. You can cut them all at the same time. It's so great. You'll never get any other quilt blocks cut out this quick. Think about this. It's 5 deep in fabric there, and I've cut out 6 trees. Now there's 30 trees right there. So theoretically it's 30 blocks. It'll probably end up being 24 to 30 blocks by the time you're done chopping your trees up. And I will tell you that every time I've done this quilt, because of doing different tree sizes on there, and some I chop them up a little more than others, I have somewhere between 27, 28 blocks up to 34, 35 tree blocks completed. So there is a little variance there. Now, as you can see, when you're doing say you're starting out, and I think I did these much taller for the wall hanging project, but most of the time I do an 8-inch tree. So if you're doing an 8 or a 9-inch tree, theoretically you need the base of your tree to be within a 2-inch one way or the other of that number. So if you're doing an 8-inch tall tree, 6 to 7-inch base is good because you want a basic triangle shape. Now, as you can see here, you might think this is unusable. The one on the left is unusable because it's quite thin. It was like the end of my strip. So, but it's not, because you can always still use that, and you'll see what I mean later about where you could place it in getting your trees chopped up. It'll just make some taller trees. It's going to be cute. Because as you can see here, you can either be really strict about, hey, I'm going to do 8-inch bases on all my trees and only use your ruler and cut it so that the tree base is 8 inches across. But you don't have to. As you can see, I've done quite a few different bases here. Okay, now the difference between the background and when you're cutting your trees is that the background you have to be a little bit more sure about, just because you want to make sure you get the desired effect with your tree in the end. So what we're going to do here is you want 2 stacks of fabrics, and they can be the same. You can have a little bit of the same in either stack, or you can really mix them up and only have one fabric. Never duplicate your fabrics in these 2 block stacks. The first thing I'll tell you is that if you've made an 8-inch tall tree, your block for your background must be 8 inches tall. So you want at least an 8 by 8 inch block for an 8-inch tall tree, or a 9 by 9 inch block for a 9-inch tall tree. If you want some room at the top of your tree for more embellishment, rather than having the top of your block go straight into your sashing, then you can always do a much taller background block than your tree. You could do it, you say you're doing an 8-inch tree, you could do a 10 by 10 inch block, and that's going to give you 2+ inches above your tree where the background fabric is going to show, and it'll be room to, like I said, embellish. Put some embroidery on there if you're making a wall hanging. Add Christmas tree ornament like a tree topper at the top of your tree if you want to. Okay, here's the other trick for the background fabrics. They must all be facing the same direction. Make sure that they're all face up in your stack, or they're all face down. If you have them mixed and matched, you're going to have an uneven amount of pieces, background pieces, to go on the left or right side of your tree. So, and what I mean by that is, this block right here, both of these pieces can only go on the left hand side of your tree, and both of these pieces over here can only go on the right hand side of a tree. So that's why I said have a basic, 6 in one stack, 6 in the other, and cut them like that. Now, the other thing is, when you cut them, regardless of your block size, whether it's 6 by 6, 8 by 8, 9 by 9, 10 by 10, whatever it is, you must have a 2-inch cut here. It must start at the corner and go in 2 inches, and it must start from the corresponding corner and go in 2 inches. And so you want one stack that's done like this, from top right to bottom left, with that 2-inch space here and the 2-inch space here. And then the other stack must go from top left to bottom right, and you need 2 inches here and 2 inches here. And here I'm showing you that, just another reminder, that if you put your fabrics face to face, you're going to have a problem, because when you cut these, you're going to end up with, hey, all of these blocks only go on one side of the tree. It's just how the math works with that. Now I'm showing you here so that you can understand what I meant by, see how these two pieces came from the original cut block? Well, when you swap it around, this can't fit here, and you have to have your 2-inch cut at the bottom of both sides of the tree for this to be a basic square when you place your trees and your backgrounds together. Okay, here's one where I'm showing you. See, you do your mixing and matching, and you've got a piece from each block, and you've got your 2 inches at the bottom and your 2-inch portion of your block cut at the bottom. And how you sew them together, you go ahead and put right sides together. Put one up next to the tree and sew it all the way up. Open that up just like this. Put your other one on the other side face down and sew all the way up. And it's going to leave you with a little tab right here that'll have to be cut off. Now, some of you know that Mom and I did clothing long before we did quilting, and so we're just a big fan of pressing your seams open rather than to one side, especially when you end up with these Y seams on these trees. It just seems to be simpler. So here I am showing you that you need to go ahead before you do your pressing and all, and you get all your trees sewn together. Go ahead and take them to the cutting table and go ahead and cut that little tail off. Okay, here's a big stack of Christmas trees that I've put together. See how you can see how the trees are sporadic about the greens, and each one has a different fabric on either side of it. Okay, and here's the fun part, and the one thing that I left out was I found it easier for time's sake to go ahead and use my ruler and square up the bottom of this tree right here. So before you cut all your trees, I would suggest taking your ruler, lining it up with the bottom of your tree, and cutting off so you don't have these two little tails hanging here when you go to put the trunk portion on. I just found it to be simpler. So this is the fun part. You can make as many cuts across your tree as you like. The more cuts you make across your tree, the more tree pieces will have to be sewn together to make a taller tree, but at the same time it gives much more interest to your blocks in your quilt. So my bigger and the bigger quilts that I've made, I've tended to a lot of times make 4 and sometimes 5 cuts across my trees, but when I make the Christmas wall hanging, I only cut each tree 3 times. And they can be random cuts. You don't even have to use your ruler. Just chop them up. And here's the fun part. See where I took my originally what was 5 trees for my Christmas wall hanging, and by the time I chopped each one up and I replaced them together, I only have 4 blocks now. And so you'll go ahead and you'll sew these 4 block pieces together. And here I'm showing you, I haven't even pressed them yet. They're back here looking cute. And I'm also showing you at this part how to put your trunk piece on. Now, for the trunk, you could do a very large quilt and use 1 fat quarter of brown for all your trunks. I mean, it really doesn't take much of that. I like to do just a few, and a lot of times I'll use scraps because, like I said, it just looks super cute. If you have different widths, see I have a tall skinny one here and then a fatter tree trunk. What I would do is sew the make some general, like originally this piece was a fat 1/8, I cut it in half. You could probably cut it into 4ths, to be honest with you, and make your tree trunk piece, sew it on the bottom of your tree block, and trim up however you like. I tend to wait until I've got a general idea of how tall my trees are in general, before all of them, before I just eyeball it before I put my trunk pieces on. That way I can see, hey, this one's going to need a little bit longer trunk on it than this one will. Like maybe I've put an extra row on one tree, so you need like a short stubby trunk that's only maybe 2 inches long, but maybe you need a 4-inch trunk on another tree. And here I'm showing you that I've got one of my blocks all sewn together with my trunk, and I'm doing a shameless plug for my very favorite craft iron. We love this thing, and it works so great with blocks that have a ton of seams in them that are close together. Then you're not ironing over more than one seam at a time. And the one reason why I love this thing, okay, unlike the regular tiny little craft iron, it actually gets very hot. It has a nice big sole plate. It has a temperature control on it, and the handle is a lot like a curling iron, so you're never touching any of the metal parts. And also, it doesn't cut itself off unless you want it to. And this little stand right here does actually work, unlike some of the other craft irons, so it will hold it up there out of your way when you're not needing it. and here I'm showing you what the sole plate is like. And you can get that at plumgoodquilting.com/shop. We have them actually much cheaper than Joann Fabrics even. Okay, here I'm showing you 4 of my blocks sewn together and pressed. And at this point you need to eyeball them, and I know that scares you traditional quilters to death. Eyeball them to figure out, okay, how wide, where's my skinniest trees? Because now it's time to start squaring up your blocks. And see, this is what's going to determine the width of your skinniest block. You need to look for this type of thing going on here. So see, this is shorter than the length above it. So go ahead and once you've found your skinniest blocks, you're going to end up squaring them all up to that width or close to it. And I went ahead and see, I'm measuring here to show you. Okay, yeah, we're going to do most of those at about 9.5 inches. Now if you have 2 drastic sizes, like you have lots of skinny ones and then you have lots that are fatter, you could also do like I did on the large quilt. You could have several rows, and you could do, okay, this center row would have basically what I've cut at a 10-inch tree, and then wide tree, and then the 2 outer rows might have 2 6.5-inch wide rows of trees, and then the outer row on each side maybe a 9-inch. So you could also do that. So just eyeball your trees and kind of figure out what you want. And this is my favorite cutting mat that allowed this process to be really simple, especially because it swivels. So you can just turn around your trees real quick. And look how adorable that looks before you even get them set in the sashing. Okay, and here I've done the Christmas tree wall hanging, and originally, like I said, I started with 5 trees, but once I cut them up I only had 4 blocks. But then, surprise, when I had to square them up, one of the trees was significantly less in width than the other 3. So I thought, well, since this is a small project, I'm not going to cut them all down that small. I kind of like the bigger wide trees because I thought I might embellish them a bit, so I went ahead and left the other block out. Okay, and then last minute we decided, you know what, that's just not cute enough. We need to add something else. So we decided to add some trapunto, and that's where you make whatever portion of your quilt you want to be puffy and stand out on its own, and you're not going to quilt directly over that portion, so it's nice because it just adds some extra dimension to your quilt. And as I said earlier, I would normally do trapunto and things like that on my unfinished blocks before I put the sashings and all, but because this was, you know, last minute decision, here we are trapuntoing the wall hanging. And as you can see, when you do trapunto, you can use 1 or 2 layers of batting, and sometimes I use wool because it's really fluffy, but this is 80-20. You cut out do a rough cut. You lay it behind, as you can see, this is the back of the wall hanging. You lay it behind the area that you want to trapunto, and this is the simple thing. If you don't want to use invisible thread, choose a tiny zigzag, or my favorite stitch is like the serpentine because it's like a little snake, and I put some metallic thread in there, and you sew from the front side. That way when you don't hit that stitch in the ditch perfectly, it's not going to matter. It's going to look super cute with that metallic thread just barely glinting off the fabric where you sewed it. Now, sewing it from the front side, after you do that, you flip it over and you trim it close to what your original seam was here, and then you flip it over, and this is what it looked like on the front. And I really had to blow this up quite large for you guys to be able to see it. It's a tiny little stitch, and see, I did it in silver and gold variegated metallic so that it's so tiny you barely can see it. But the main thing is, when you see the front of the quilt after we've done all the quilting on the rest of it, the tree is very puffy. Well, here's our finished product for the wall hanging, and thank you so much for watching our tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. And just so you know, we are offering a kit for the wall hanging under Quilt Kits at plumgoodquilting.com, and we also have put together 3 Fat 8s packs, one with 12 neutrals, one with 8 Christmas greens, and one with regular just tree greens that you might enjoy. Thanks again for watching our tutorial. Have a great day.